So, Michael, I just recently realized that you actually did use 10-speed gear shifters. I thought that was just some kind of mad professor ruse while you're on stage. What's up with that?
Well, it's because I had Chamberlins. And Chamberlins were, a Chamberlin was a box of 35 tape players. And I would use, I had a couple of those. And I guess I'm going to have to just explain that a Chamberlin had 35 tapes, half-inch tapes, and they were pieces of tape, not tape loops. Because in order to play a note out of an instrument and have you recognize what instrument it is, you have to hear the beginning of the note. The beginning is where your ear determines what sound you're hearing. So you can't have a tape loop. It's a piece of tape, and all 35 tapes are constantly rewinding. And each half-inch tape had 8 tracks. And so you had a stereo playback head, which would pick up 1 and 3, 2 and 4, 3 and 5, 4 and 6, 5 and 7 and 6, or 6 and 8. And all 35 tapes were sitting next to each other, the big flywheel driving, and each tape was 64 inches long. So it would play for 8 seconds and snap back, rewind immediately to be ready to play again. So you could play rapidly, pretty rapidly, one note after another. But each track was like the first track, say, was violins. On every note, violins, but on the first note, maybe you had this note. You had 35 notes. Each was on a separate note. And the first track might have been violins, and the second track might have been flute. Fourth track was... So you might have heard me say, oh, I'm on the first floor, I'm on the 7th floor. In my show I would talk about the different tracks that way. And Mr. Chamberlin, which was an amazing, great character, Mr. Chamberlin made these things in Upland, California. And when you go to buy a Chamberlin, you can't go play a Chamberlin because Mr. Chamberlin would be sitting, he'd play it for you. But if you went to try to hit a note, kind of had this kind of thing, he wouldn't let you play it till you bought it. You had to give him half the money down and no guarantee of delivery date. 4 people there, he and his wife and his son and his daughter, his son Richard, who's I'm sure still around in Cucamonga. Very wonderful people, really wonderful people. Mr. Chamberlin also restored Hupmobiles, collected them. But Mr. Chamberlin, the story goes, had a salesman that went overseas, and instead of selling Chamberlins, he manufactured mellotrons. And I only have seen mellotrons in the basement of a warehouse, and they were really, if a Chamberlin was a devil's contraption, a mellotron was way worse. And that's why there's 10-speed gear shifters on, so you could select the tracks and nudge it. You see, when you move the track heads, you got to get it exactly. Each tape head, each pickup had to be exactly over the track that you wanted. The 2 tracks you could have at the same time. And in fact, the reason I had sound effects was that the girl singer could only sing, she couldn't sing 25 notes. She only sang 18 notes. So above her voice and below her voice, I had pigs and cows and wind and rain and locomotive and booing and you had to be careful, because if you were playing the chick singer and you went 1 note too low, you'd get dogs barking or something. Yeah. Wow. Mr. Chamberlin eventually sold Chamberlins to the Moody Blues. Eventually, my understanding is that people who were really using these devices came to want to use Chamberlins. And I had a wonderful man named Monty Nichols, a state trooper in California, a ham radio operator, figured out a way to remotely control them that worked, because Harry Chamberlain's way was contact strips under your keyboard, which froze together right away because they were using washing machine solenoids with kind of high, 3/4 of an amp at 24 volts. the contacts wouldn't work very long, and so Monty invented transistor keying for me. And I could play either Chamberlin from either of the two keyboards of the organ. Yeah. Long time ago.